All right. Hey, just one clarifying thing. He said drop it in the offering baskets. You can drop it in the offering boxes as you leave here. Especially if you're interested in finding more about baptism. It was so sweet. We baptized 25 people last week. We've already got another 25 lined up for this next weekend. And so it's really exciting. If you want to be a part of that crew of people and you want to find out more, just check that box, drop it in one of the boxes as you leave here, and we'll follow up with you. If you're online or in VR, same type of thing, just go to our website and you can get more information there. All right, today we continue in our series going through the book of Acts. I hope you've been reading along with us. If not, join us on the Bible reading plan. It's sweet. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever had a conversation with someone where it seems like they are just super passionate about a subject that you're like, all right, that's great. I've got, with 9 kids, I've had, especially when your kids are younger, they talk about things that are really passionate to them or at the moment that you're like, man, it's just really hard to get really excited about these Pokemon cards right now. My 9-year-old son, he might get a new stack and be like, all right, Dad, look at my whole new stack. And he's going card by card by card by card, And you're like, okay, I get it. There's a lot of cards here. But here's the deal. Whatever is most compelling to you in the moment is really, it's usually what we'll talk about. And that's just, it's the nature of things. If it's an illness, let's say there's a recent diagnosis, of course you're going to be talking about that. Maybe it's a cure, where it's like, hey, we're getting breakthrough with the doctors or whatever it might be, and you're talking about that. Maybe it's a love for a sport or a sports team, and you can't help but talk about them. If you're in school, maybe it's a play or a musical or a club that you're a part of. Maybe at work, it's a project that you're tackling. Maybe it's a wedding that's coming up. Maybe it's a divorce that you're going through. Maybe it's a baby that's coming, or maybe it's a funeral that you're facing. Maybe it's a new house or a new something that you're getting. And we typically do this. We come around to talking about the things that are most compelling to us in our lives. And so my question for you, just kind of as we dive into this morning, is what compels you? What's the thing that compels you? The Apostle Paul, when writing to the church in Corinth in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14, he says this. He says, Christ's love compels us. Right there. See, the Apostle Paul is trying to make an argument that doesn't apply just to him, but he's actually trying to make an argument that applies to all Christ followers, and he starts by saying, Christ's love is the thing that compels us. Because we're convinced that one died for all, therefore all died. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. Now, I know that you might be like, hold on, one died and so all died. And what does that all mean? It's simply this, that Jesus, when he laid down his life for us at the cross, his death on the cross was for all sin and for all of us. In fact, even in baptism, and then the verse goes on to say, and therefore all died. So in baptism is this beautiful picture of what has happened spiritually in us. That just as Christ went into the grave, when we go under the water, it's this picture of being buried with Christ. But we don't stay under the water. We come out of the water just like Christ was raised from the dead. We come out of the water, but it's this beautiful picture of our old life was buried with him and it stays in the grave, and what comes out of the water is this new life, and we live for him. And so in the same way, it's like, for one died, therefore all have died, so that all who now live for the one who laid down his life for us. And because of what he did for us at the cross, his love demonstrated there, that's the thing that is the most compelling thing to us. And the Apostle Paul, he lived a life that was compelled by the love of God to share the good news everywhere he went, and that love that he saw displayed, or that he knew of displayed at the cross of Christ for the salvation of souls and for the forgiveness of sins. And so maybe let me ask it again, is your life compelled by anything? A simple definition of compel is this. It's to be forced or obliged to do something. And Paul is saying there's something that in my life that is the driving force. I love that. To be forced to do something, he's like, it's the driving force behind everything. What compels you? What's your driving force? Every one of us has I would call almost a pinnacle force. It's the thing that rules over everything else, that kind of drives everything else. It tops everything else. And culture is constantly trying to, get different values in front of us that we would make them the priority. So for like some of us, it might be, or you find yourself being drawn into social connection, that becomes your driving force, your relationships, your community. And that's like, well, that's what you value most. Or maybe it's a sport or a hobby. Some of us have in our houses, some guys have man caves that if you walked into it, you would think it's a shrine to a sports team, right? You know, that's like, I'm not bashing on you for loving a sports team, but culture is definitely saying, hey, that's something that's worthy of being the overarching value of everything in your life. For some of you, maybe it's intellect or knowledge. Maybe it might be achievement or winning. It can become money or stuff or power or influence, acceptance, love, maybe peace, contentment, safety, all these things. And for most of us, we actually probably find in life that these things are often jockeying for top position, because whatever you value most, that's the thing that likely compels you most, and all your behaviors will fall in line with that thing that you value most. And this is really the big idea, is what you value most will compel you most. And the Apostle Paul says Christ's love compels us to live the life that we live. Does the work of Christ in your life have a compelling voice? It's part of why I really value communion, actually. It's this regular coming back to the work of the cross, that it would be meaningful to me once again, that I would not lose sight of how rich it is and how amazing it is, and that it would once again compel me to live my life for Him constantly. And everything that we're going to see in these next few chapters in the book of Acts, we're going to see lives that are compelled by the love of Christ. Lives compelled to live for Christ. Okay, so because I'm really trying to cover 3 to 4 chapters, I'm not going to read them all, but I will highlight just kind of like, here's what happens in the next chapter. So let me just give you a few, okay? Chapter 6, because we went to chapter 5 last week. Chapter 6 is the raising of really additional church leaders. And then Stephen, who's one of the early church leaders, he's seized by the religious leaders for his bold faith. Acts chapter 7 is Stephen's speech. He's being held by the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish religious leaders, and he gives a long speech to them, and it ends by calling out their hardened hearts. As a result, kind of as he calls out their hardened hearts, because their hearts are hardened to God working and hardened to Jesus. And in Acts chapter 7, verse 54, here's how they respond. When the members of the Sanhedrin heard this, they were furious and they gnashed their teeth at him. They all rushed at him. They dragged him out of the city and they began to stone him. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul. Now, Saul is the Apostle Paul. Right here at the beginning of Acts, he's referred to as Saul and Paul, and I will probably use his name interchangeably. Basically, before his conversion to Christ, he's almost always referred to as Saul. After his conversion, throughout the rest of the New Testament, he'll be referred to as Paul. But here we see what Saul is up to, and that is he's a part of persecuting Christians in his early days. That's what he's up to, okay? And so when we think about what compelled these early Christians, okay, Stephen's life is compelled by the love of Christ, and it costs him his life. Now, here's what's so important that starts on this day. On this day that Stephen is stoned, the very next verse, Acts chapter 8, verse 1, it says this: on that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Now, here's why this is so important. Remember in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, Jesus, his final words to the disciples before he ascends to heaven, he says, you're going to be my witnesses, or you're going to receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then the ends of the earth. Now, from the time that Jesus made that statement and the early church is being established, over a year goes by, and you want to know where they're at? Jerusalem. They haven't made it to the rest of the statement, which was Judea and Samaria. It's Acts chapter 8, verse 1, that all of a sudden they finally go. And they go because persecution comes to the church. It's almost like Jesus is like, all right, you guys, you got an assignment. Here's your assignment. And the disciple or all the early Christians are like, but we love just being a big family church together. And they lose sight of the assignment. And he's like, all right, you guys have lost sight of the assignment. Time to persecute you and kick you out and get you after it. And they finally go there. Okay, and then this is what happens. Acts chapter 8, verse 3. But Saul began to destroy the church, going house to house. He dragged off both men and women, put them in prison. Listen, though, those who have been scattered, going to Judea and Samaria, preached the word wherever they went. This is kind of going to be the key phrase I want to land on today, is this idea of they preached the word wherever they went. It's kind of like wherever they ended up, getting scattered to or going, they couldn't help themselves but tell people about the love of Christ that compelled them. It was so meaningful to their lives. They couldn't help but just talk about what Jesus had done for them. Okay, we're going to come back to that idea, but let's just continue on. Acts chapter 8, what happens there? Okay, Philip, he's another one of these early church leaders. He takes the gospel to Samaria and then all the way to Caesarea. And during this period of time, 3 years go by, okay? I know it doesn't capture right there in Acts, but we do know historically 3 years go by, and what's happening is what we saw at the beginning of Acts chapter 3, where it says Paul was persecuting the church, he's dragging people into prison, and for 3 years, that's exactly what Paul is doing. He's persecuting the early church, he's looking for these early church leaders, he's dragging Christians out of their homes, and he's throwing them in prison. Acts chapter 9, verses 1 through 9, is what we often refer to as Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. Okay, so Paul is literally going to Damascus, and he's looking to capture Christians and throw them in prison. That's what he's all about. God has an encounter with him. Really, Jesus does. It says, a light shine from heaven. Everyone who's with Paul sees the light, and Paul hears a voice from heaven, and it says, Paul, why are you persecuting me? And he goes, who are you? And he goes, I'm Jesus, the one who you're persecuting. And then God blinds Paul right there on the spot. Just blinds him. For 3 days, Paul will be blind. Now, I asked kind of this question, why does God blind Paul? Why does he blind him? I think there are times that the Lord will actually allow us to go through moments of suffering to mark us for a call. I can almost imagine, though, for the Apostle Paul, that, imagine you have this amazing moment. Christ literally shows himself from heaven, says, why are you persecuting me? And then you can't see anything for 3 days. I could almost imagine for Paul, he is just in his own world for a moment, and all he can do is recount his last conversation that he had. For 3 days, all he's thinking about is that moment that has now left him blind. And it marks him. And the next event and the next person in the book of Acts is probably one of the most, I think, overlooked yet bold individuals who lives, once again, compelled by the love of Christ and in the book of Acts. And his name is Ananias. And God's going to call to this guy in a vision, and he's going to give him an assignment to go and pray for the Apostle Paul so that his eyesight might be restored. So let's pick it up. Acts chapter 9, verse 10. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. And the Lord called to him in a vision. Ananias, yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he's praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Lord, Ananias answered, I've heard many reports about this man and all the harm that he's done to your holy people in Jerusalem, and how he's come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name. This is Ananias' way of saying, God, I hear the assignment, but I don't know if you got the memo. Saul's the guy who's like the hunter of Christians, and you want me to go purposefully to him. Like, I don't know if you know, I'm a Christian, and he likes throwing Christians in prison, and I don't really want to go into prison. And so he's just, I love that he is just making the argument to God as if God's unaware, And yet the Lord replies back to him, and he says this in verse 15. The Lord said to Ananias, go. He doesn't really have a debate with him. Go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I don't know about you, but I'm incredibly grateful for Ananias. You want to know why? Because he goes. God says go, and he goes. He goes into the lion's den, essentially. He literally goes to the guy who's trying to capture people just like him and throw him in prison. He goes right up to him. And so now check it out. He goes to him. He prays for him. Saul's sight is restored. And then Paul eats. His energy is restored. And then notice how he responds. Acts chapter 9, verse 20 and 21. I love this. At once he, this is being Paul, began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. All those who heard him were astonished and asked, isn't this the man who raised havoc in Jerusalem among those who call on this name? Hasn't he come here to take them as prisoners to the chief priests? Like everyone else is saying, hey, Paul, did you not get your own memo about yourself? They're all like pointing it out. But I love how Paul responds. At once he began to preach. Here's what I love. It says, it doesn't say, hey, Paul gets his eyesight restored and Paul commits to go to seminary. Paul decided to go that he needed a good year in Sunday school. Paul decided that he needed to sit in small group for a couple years. No, it's at once. Paul's been a believer for one day. And at once, he goes. Now listen, if I could encourage you in any way, it's this. It's if you're a follower of Christ for one day, 1 week, 1 year, one decade, or multiple decades, you have enough today to be able to tell someone about Jesus. You have enough. Even if it's only one day, I know you have enough. Paul did it on day one. He's like, I only got really one story. That's his story, you know? And he's going to stick with it, and he's going to make his argument to people of why Jesus is the risen Christ. Sometimes what happens is we tell ourselves that we need to know more. I need to be better equipped. But here's the deal. It's not amiss if you feel like you don't know enough about Jesus. It's only amiss if we don't tell others what we do know. Let me say it again. It's not amiss if you feel like you don't know enough, but it is amiss if you don't tell them what you do know. Even if you feel like it's only a little bit, if it's only your story, start with that. A few months ago, it was like Christmas time. I was picking up one of my daughters from the airport. And when I go to pick them up from the airport when they're flying in, I always go and I meet them at baggage claim because I kind of want to be there and have this, beautiful Hallmark moment where we hug and all that. So anyhow, so I'm waiting there. And I think I've told you this before. I get talked to all the time when I'm waiting in baggage claim. I don't know. Do I look super friendly or something like that? Or I know a lot about airports, maybe? Now one time I told you this, I was standing right in front of the info desk. I didn't even realize that. And people are just asking me questions. I'm like, wow, I'm making answers up constantly, but I'm like, yeah, go over there. Anyhow, I figured it out. Don't stand in front of the info desk. You will get asked questions. So I wasn't standing there, but I was standing off to the side, and I had this Hispanic couple comes walking on up to me, and I could see their desperation in their face, and they start speaking Spanish to me. Now, I don't speak Spanish very well. I understand Spanish okay. I speak Spanish very poorly, and so together, we're having this Spanglish charades conversation, trying to figure out, where they're trying to go. And I could figure out they were trying to catch a bus and where they were trying to go and all these things. And so we're going back and forth. I got Google Translate out, we're trying. I'm doing my best. And we're going for a while. And then eventually I got to a place where I was like, all right, I felt kind of stuck and I didn't know what to do next. So I said, vámonos. And so they followed me. I don't know. We were friends at this point. And so they follow me all the way down the hall, and I'm just looking for a worker. And I see a worker off to the side. He's Hispanic, and so I walk on over to him. I go, "Do you speak Spanish?" And he goes, "Yes." And so I explained to him what I thought was happening in our conversation. I don't know. I just explained it to him. And then they kind of handed off, and we hugged and all that. And we do vacations now together. I'm joking. We don't. But it was sweet. We'd bonded, over this, trying to communicate for some period of time. And then I handed him off, and I went on my way. Now, here's the deal. I don't know about you, but I think some of you would have felt like, Josh, you would have been totally valid to just look at this couple when they come on up to you and say, "No hablo español." You probably could have done that, but that's not true. Yo hablo español un poco, speaking a little, but not much. And here's the deal. I think this is what happens for a lot of us as Christians as well, is I think in life, we go through life, and a lot of you are just going, "I don't speak Jesus." And that's not true. That's not true. You may not speak Jesus well, but you actually have the most important piece of information about Jesus in your heart, and you're going through life as if you don't speak Jesus, and people are coming up to you with desperation on their face, and you're like, "I don't speak Jesus." And I'm like, that's not true. The problem is something is in your heart that is compelling you more than Jesus is. But if the love of Christ compels us, then even if you're like, I don't know if I'll say it perfectly, I am going to say what I know is true about Christ and what he's done in my life. Right? And so now, I just love it. Paul, at once he began. Christians, at once, begin. Just begin. You may not do it perfectly, but begin. Just try. And then I love what we see about Paul. It says he goes to the synagogue. Now, why would he go to the synagogue? Well, here's why. Because for the Apostle Paul, that's where he grew up. That was his sweet spot. The Apostle Paul was a religious leader. So he was essentially like a Pharisee. So when you want to think about the place where Paul would hang out for fun, it's going to be the synagogue. The synagogue was the Apostle Paul's coffee shop. It was his gym. It was his hobby. It was the place, it was where he would naturally want to go. In fact, for his entire life, every time he'll go into a city, you want to know where he'll go first? To the synagogue. Why? Because that's his coffee shop. Even when he goes into a Gentile town, you want to know where he's going to go? To wherever their place of worship is. It's why when he's in Athens, he goes to the Parthenon. Because it's a temple to Athena, but he's like, all right, you guys drink caribou here, but I like Starbucks, but that's okay. I'm going to go to the coffee shop because I get you people there. Does that make sense? And so here's the deal. For us, here's how I see it, or what I think it means for us, is that we need to be people that you go to your sweet spot. So where's your sweet spot? Well, it's the place where you spend probably the majority of your day. If you're in school, it's probably your school. If it's in work, it could be your work, whatever that might be. It could be that you're at a construction site or at a car dealership, at an office building, a resort, a restaurant, a hospital, a warehouse, a factory. That's part of your sweet spot. Then it's the place where you go, where you choose to go after work. It's the sidelines of your kids' sport. It's the gym where you like to go work out. It's the ski hill where you ski. It's the roads that you like to walk. It's the path that you walk your dog on every single day. It's the coffee shop you hang out at or the restaurant that you eat at every single week. It's the barber chair that you sit in or the hairdresser that you go to every couple weeks or once a month. Those are the places that, guess what? They're your regular sweet spot where you have relationships with people. Now here's the deal. You got to realize it. Let me just give you a little glimpse into my life. For Lisa and I, this might be a little shocking to some of you. Lisa and I, we really don't like going to festivals. We don't. We've never been to Venetian Fest. Oh, sacrilege. Some of you are like, what? It's the greatest thing ever. Not to me. It's just not. I don't know. I don't like it, okay? We don't coach our kids' sports teams. I know. Some of you are like, oh, you're those parents. Yep. That's us, because we couldn't make our kids better athletes, out there. We don't hang out at coffee shops. Like if we're going to go, we're probably going to go through the drive-thru, and then we're going to go down to the lake and go sit along the lakefront, or go sit in a couch at the end of a hallway in a resort. That's what we're going to do. We prefer to walk our roads as opposed to go to a gym. I hate shopping. I know, some of you ladies are like, Josh, you are missing out in life. I don't think so. I just hate it. I don't like going into grocery stores. I walked into a grocery store for the first time in about 3 years the other week, and I was like, this is a dangerous place. There's so many options. I just don't know what to do with myself. And it was just like, I knew I was not in my place, in my happy place. Anyhow, there's a ton of, here's why I say this to you. There's a ton of places that I don't like to go, but you do. And that's the point. A lot of these places, you're like, I love going there. That's awesome. Go there. Because here's the deal. You don't have to find a new place to go and new people to reach for Jesus. You just need to go to the place that is your sweet spot and tell them about what you know about Christ in that place. See, if you're waiting if you're sitting there going, okay, reaching Walworth County rests upon Pastor Josh and Lisa and some of the pastoral staff, we are doomed. But if 2,000 people here at Lakeland all go out this week and tell people wherever we go, because that's what it says in Acts chapter 8, verse 3 or 4, where it says, and wherever they went, they preached the gospel. What would happen if as we went out, we all just kind of told people about what we know about Jesus? Why? Because his love has compelled us. If your life has been transformed or touched in any way by Jesus, tell someone about it. After the Thursday night service, I had a friend who came up to me and he just reminded me of this verse in Revelation, and I love it. This is so good. In Revelation, it says, by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, we overcome the devil. Listen to this. By the blood of the Lamb, he already did that part. And the word of our testimony, meaning you might only have one story, it's how Christ's love has transformed me. Listen, when you open your mouth and you tell people your testimony, Christ's blood did his work. When we do our work, you want to know what happens? The devil is on the run. By the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, we overcome the work of the devil. Can I say it again? By the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, we overcome the work of the devil. This is Revelation chapter 12. It's mind-blowing that simply all you have to do is speak the little bit that you do know about Jesus and what he's done in your life, and you want to know what happens? The devil is on the run. We start taking territory immediately. What would happen if we actually all did that? So here's a simple challenge this week. Are you ready? Simple challenge. Try to just talk about God or Jesus with somebody in your sweet spot. Wherever your sweet spot is. If you walk on the roads every day and you pass people, have a conversation with them. In your workplace, in the places that you like to hang out, don't just go to the gym and put on your headphones, but have a conversation with someone. Just plant that in the middle of the conversation. Plant your story about what God's been doing in your life. What would happen? Well, I know what happened in the book of Acts, and the church just grew at such an amazing rate because wherever they went, they told their story. Why don't you stand? Let me close this here in prayer. Jesus, I'm just so grateful that these early Christians, their lives are so compelled by the work of Christ. Guys like Stephen lay down their life for it. Guys like Ananias face the most difficult thing. It's like walking into the lion's den to pray for a guy who's persecuting the church. And the Apostle Paul, he just at once goes and he starts to preach. Lord, I pray for every single one of us here. It's not that we've got to find new places to go and new people. It's just that we go to the places that are our sweet spot and we tell people about the love of Christ that is compelling us, that has done such a work in us. We may not have it perfect, but we can tell them the most important thing, which is what Christ has done for us and for them at the cross. Lord, I pray that you would help us that you would unlock in us the fear where we feel intimidated. It is the lie of the enemy to intimidate us around our witness or around our story. And the reason why he intimidates us is because he knows the truth that by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, he is overcome. So of course he's going to lie and try to intimidate us. But no longer will we be intimidated because by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, he is overcome. And so we will live and share our testimony. The love of Christ compels us to live our lives for him and to live our lives for you. Pray this in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, amen. Amen. Hey, if we could pray for you in any way, our prayer partners are going to be right down here. We'd love to pray for you today. If you want to give, you can give in the boxes in the back or online. Be blessed. We'll see you guys next week.